Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. We are co-sponsored by the Akron Community Jewish Center. My dad lost his hearing in one ear when he was a young man. He used to say he didn't need a hearing aid. My sister, mom, and I would look at each other and say we were his hearing aid. Let's look at hearing loss by the numbers. 48 million Americans have a significant hearing loss. People with hearing loss wait an average of 7 years before seeking help. 15 million people in the United States with hearing loss avoid seeking help ever. 1 out of 3 people over the age of 65 have some degree of hearing loss. 2 out of 3 people over 75 have hearing loss. Exposure to a noisy subway for just 15 minutes a day can cause permanent damage to your hearing over time. The world of hearing and hearing loss has changed dramatically in the last decades. To take us on a tour of what is hearing loss and what can be done about it in this decade, our guest today, Kristina Rynes, Ph.D. in Audiology, will fill us in. Welcome to Forum 360.
Thank you for having me today.
I could hear that.
Oh, awesome.
That's always a good thing, right?
That's a good thing. Good
not after I've lived with it for a long time, so not to make fun of it. That is a good thing. Yeah. You've spent your whole career in what in the profession is called audiology?
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
What drew you to hearing, and what's kept you engaged in that same area for your whole career?
Well, it's kind of a funny little diversion on how I got into audiology. I failed organic chemistry 3 times, and the advisor said, "You need to try something else."
So you were taking organic
chemistry
because
to go into medicine.
Into medicine, okay.
And that was not my strong suit. They suggested going to the career center, and audiology popped up as one of the potential careers. I love working one-on-one with people. I love helping people. I love the medical aspect of audiology. I love having the one-on-one relationships that we develop for a long period of time.
Now, with your PhD in audiology, then are you referred to as Dr. Rynes?
I am, yeah. It's technically called an AUD, which is a doctorate of audiology. It's a little different than a PhD.
But I'd still call you doctor.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm curious. Most people, when a baby is born, count toes and fingers. Were you concerned about hearing when your 3 children were born with your background? And what could you do to be reassured when a baby is born?
Actually, when my children were born is when they started the universal newborn hearing screenings. So we were able to test their hearing when they were just born. And they do that now for all babies in the hospitals.
Now that's mandatory, that's not
mandatory.
an optional.
No, it's mandatory testing.
So if a baby then passes that test, then that's checked off for good, then, or is it something that could be revisited?
It could be revisited anytime a parent has a concern about their child's hearing. We always want to see them, but typically they'll be then rechecked once they start into like preschool and elementary school.
You've been an expert in your field for 2 decades while raising a family and continuing your education. What would you say, before we talk about hearing, what would you say to women out there about a career and a family?
It is a difficult balance. However, with strong support systems, you can do anything.
With strong support systems.
Exactly.
This is kind of a 2-part question about your background before we move into hearing and lack of hearing. But you continued working on your PhD after you had your 3 children.
Yes.
So, sometimes perhaps we may assume in the medical field that someone gets all their education and then they spend the rest of their time
working
in that profession. But you got your PhD after you had 3 children. So first, let me ask you, why did you want or feel you needed to continue after you had your 3 children?
Our profession changed the way that they were educating students. It used to be, when I graduated, a master's degree was what was required to practice in audiology. About 15, 20 years ago, they changed that, and there are no longer master's degree programs. It is only doctorate degree. So in order to keep current with the graduates that are coming out of Kent State and their program, I felt it was important to go back to school and continue that education.
Okay, so it was important, not only just for your professional image, but just for your professional career. Interesting. I'm, quote, sure, my hearing is normal, isn't it? First of all, what is normal hearing? Is there a normal?
Yes, there is a normal.
Okay.
There is a normal. And when you get into the technical terminology, normal hearing is anywhere from 0 to 20 decibels throughout the frequency range, which we normally test anywhere from 250 hertz to 8,000 hertz. So as long as you score within that 0 to 20 decibels, you have normal hearing.
So when you hear that, I have normal hearing, is that because people have a reason to believe they don't? And so do they tend to then not have good hearing if they're asking that? If we're asking, does that mean that there is a problem? Or are we just confirming that we can still hear?
I think a lot of times people think that maybe they have a hearing loss because they may be missing a couple of things, but we are so distracted in our world today that we have cell phones, we're constantly monitoring our devices. Are we really focused on the conversation? So we may be missing things just because we're not focused, not necessarily that we have a hearing loss.
I had a Cocker Spaniel, Missy, that went deaf. But when she was first going deaf, I would say, I don't know if she can't hear me or she's just doing a better job of ignoring me. Well, I imagine it's somewhat similar with people. Is that a concern at some point? Do they not hear me or are they ignoring me?
And that's the question, is like, are you hearing? Or are you just not paying attention to what I'm saying? And you can potentially have, remember, in that 0 to 20 decibels, some of your frequencies can be normal and some of them not be normal.
Well, that's interesting because my very next question is good hearing situational? Or like, if you have good hearing, do you have good hearing then to hear everything? Or can it be situational, that in some situations you have good hearing and in some situations you don't?
And it is very situational. So I may have normal hearing, but if I go into the local restaurant where there's a lot of conversations, it's a Friday evening, there's music playing, I may not hear what someone's saying across the table from me, and I still have normal hearing. So it depends upon the situation that you're in.
So let's say that a person who's not quite yet a patient gets as far as to admit that they have a hearing loss or potentially have a hearing loss. What's next? What do they do next?
We always suggest that you make an appointment with either your primary care physician or with an ear, nose, and throat physician so that they can examine the ears and make sure that there's nothing medically going on. Perhaps you have an ear canal that's blocked with wax. Maybe you have a structural abnormality. That is something that needs to be addressed.
Now, every day, I think everybody sees advertisements in the newspaper and in the mail coming to us promoting hearing aids. How does a person know what's right for them?
I think first of all, you have to look at your situations. What environments are you in? How comfortable are you in those environments? Do you feel like you're missing something? I always suggest to people to think about, how comfortable are you going to that senior meeting? Are you able to hear the speaker? Can you hear the person across the table from you? What about the person sitting next to you? And that will really kind of give you an idea if you're ready for something. And whether that is a hearing aid.
Now, why does it appear, now maybe to you, the professional, it doesn't appear this way, but to me it appears that there's so many different kinds of hearing aids out there. Are there that many different kinds? And if there are, why are there so many different kinds?
I think there are a couple basic styles of hearing aids, but most of it's very basic. You know, it's either in your ear or behind your ear.
Oh,
And
really?
that's pretty much it.
So it can be behind your ear?
True.
And not in your ear?
Correct.
Well, see, you think that's basic, and I didn't know that.
Those are the most common ones these days, are the ones that go behind your ear. They're actually less visible than the ones that go inside your ear.
And besides, thanks to Bluetooth and whatever, like, we just assume it's something to do with their phone anyways, because
They're talking on their phone.
yeah, that's right. Oh, that's interesting. Well, today we are going on a little journey to understand better hearing and hearing loss. And our guide on this journey is Kristina Rynes, Ph.D. in Audiology, that's helping us understand about hearing and what we can do about it, both on our person and in our home in a few minutes, should we choose to need or want to do something. Why doesn't Medicare pay for hearing aids?
It's actually written into Medicare law that hearing aids are excluded as a benefit.
Medicare, I'm going to assume here for a moment, I'm not sure, but I'm going to assume that Medicare pays for a wheelchair. I'm pretty sure that they pay for my mom's wheelchair. So who and why and how do they make a distinction that a hearing aid is less of a help to someone than, say, a wheelchair?
I honestly, I don't have a good answer for that question.
But they don't pay any?
They do not pay anything for hearing aids. They will pay for the hearing assessment. So if you come into the office and see one of the physicians and they do the examination and it's determined medically necessary for your treatment to have this hearing test, they will pay for that.
But if it's medically necessary for you to hear, they won't pay for that?
Not for the hearing aid, no.
Now, do you ever in your journals and you know, you go to professional association meetings, is this ever anything that's brought up that out of all the issues we have in this country, is there any kind of like groundswell for getting Medicare to pay for?
I haven't really heard anything on that front. I've heard more of just other insurances paying for hearing aids, or there's a big swell now for groundswell for over-the-counter hearing aids. Like over-the-counter glasses. You can go and buy your cheater glasses at the drugstore. So they're working towards perhaps opening up that as an avenue for less expensive entry-level hearing aids.
So does insurance, so we check off that Medicare does not pay. But now insurance, does a person's insurance pay for their hearing aid?
I would estimate probably 90% of the time it does not.
It does not?
It does not pay. So hearing aids are an out-of-pocket expense for a patient.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, I don't have coverage that pays for, say, glasses, but I know that some people have coverage that pays for eyeglasses. But hearing aids aren't seen the same way. That
no, they're not.
Improving sight and improving hearing isn't seen the same way?
It's not. Not by the insurance companies, no.
Interesting.
But research is showing that hearing is as important as your connectivity to your surroundings. They're even doing some research into dementia and hearing loss.
I can understand that. Just as watching my dad, as I mentioned in the intro, you do get more and more isolated.
Correct.
The more that you can't hear, and then it becomes a problem. And
quality of life.
It is
what it is. It really is.
Wow, that's so interesting. Now, you can buy almost anything online. I think I've ordered like 3 times in the last week. I've ordered something from Amazon or eBay. Can I buy a hearing aid online?
You certainly can. There are some vendors that are selling hearing aids online. The problem then becomes is who is going to fit the hearing aid. Remember, we talked about the decibels and the frequency response and what your actual hearing loss looks like. All hearing aids have to be specifically fit to your hearing loss. So if you order that online, you now have to contract with a local provider to actually fit the hearing aid.
So I get a hearing aid, let's say, or my grandfather or father, or somebody gets a hearing aid. It's not a matter of whether that hearing aid is good or not necessarily. It has to be fit to that person and that person's challenges.
Exactly.
I would assume.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
They're very technical. There's
and
a
so
lot
that's
of,
where someone like you would come in, and the relationship that they would have with you, so that it's not they have a hearing aid, but they have one that actually helps them hear.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, I've seen the commercial where the phone prints out to grandpa when the granddaughter calls and what she's saying. And when I see this, I always kind of laugh and go, is that too good to be true?
Oh,
or
it's wonderful.
It really is as good?
It's absolutely wonderful. As long as that screen is big enough for the patient to read, it is such a phenomenal assistive device for them. It enables you to communicate normally as anyone else would on the telephone. And it's actually covered by the government. That is. Americans with Disabilities Act.
So why is that covered? Or you probably can't answer that. I need a government person to say, oh, that makes sense to the government that that is covered, but a hearing aid is not.
Yeah.
Now, is that something, can you tell at all from your patients, is that a popular?
It is.
Yes.
Probably about half of my patients that have hearing aids, and even some that don't have hearing aids, will have that phone system.
Interesting.
It's wonderful.
Now, while we're going down that line of new, because the only way I would know about that was just seeing that commercial, I read the other day that some car manufacturers will only make electric cars in the next few years.
I'm excited about that.
They won't make gas cars. Of course, they'd really love my 97, wouldn't they? But that's in the car industry. What are some things that you can see in the future, or that perhaps are already here in the world of hearing or non-hearing, that you can see coming in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, besides the over-the-counter hearing aids, which I think is kind of exciting because that opens up a basic level of technology to a lot of people who are kind of sitting on the fence, not sure if this is really a route that they want to travel down yet.
Now, before you go, hold that thought, but when someone comes to you, can you assess whether they come to you out of their own free will, or does somebody make them come?
That's the conversations that we have. And we do sit down and talk for quite a bit, the patient and I. And that usually will come up in that conversation, that maybe they're not quite ready, but their daughter or their family member or their spouse is saying, I need to get this hearing aid.
And so will it come to the same end result, or does it need to come from their recognition that it's
always
a problem?
best if it comes from them, because they're ready for help and they're ready to pursue this, because it is work. Wearing hearing aids is not as easy as putting on a pair of glasses.
So go down that road a little further when you say it's work.
It's work. You have to get used to hearing things again. Sometimes having a hearing loss and not hearing the creaking floors and the dripping faucet or the ice maker is kind of nice. You don't realize how noisy your car is until you put that hearing aid on and go, this is maybe not exactly what I was ready for. So it does take a lot of work on their part.
Now, once they have it, does it take work? Other than, say, putting it in or on every day and taking it off, does it take work and maintenance once they have it?
There's minor maintenance, like a daily cleaning and then a monthly maintenance that most hearing aids will go through, but it's very simple. That's not extensive. It's more the mental work that has to take place to process the sounds and get used to hearing the sounds and making sense of what you're hearing.
And what about how hard it is? As a communication coach, I referred to the honest mirror, that we have to look in the honest mirror. But how difficult, can you help us understand how difficult is it for someone to look in the honest mirror and say to themselves that they have a hearing loss?
For some people, it's very easy. When they're socially, well, I wouldn't say that you're pushed to that point, but in order to participate socially in the activities that they want to do, they know, I have to do this because I'm limiting myself. Other people, it takes a little bit longer, and sometimes it's a little bit longer for the older, 85, 90-year-olds.
Well, that's an interesting question. Is it more difficult for an older person to look in that honest mirror, or a younger person? I mean, as a non-professional, I probably would have thought it was harder for a younger person to admit that they have a hearing problem, because that's only supposed to happen to old people. So is it harder for an older person, because is that another way of having to admit that
they're getting older? I think sometimes it's harder for men, because there is that little bit of a stigma that I'm not perfect anymore. And I think for younger people, it's not as difficult because they embrace technology.
So for younger people, there's always a technological answer to anything. Oh, that's interesting. Now, if your crystal ball worked, okay, and I've come to realize that no matter how smart someone is, none of our crystal balls work, but if your crystal ball worked, are there any changes that you can see evolving in the next 5 or 10 years in the hearing loss world?
A lot of what's coming through is the connectivity, being able to control your hearing aid with your cell phone. Not just adjust volume or programs, because hearing aids can have multiple programs, which means you can have a quiet setting for when you're at home, you can have a restaurant setting, you can have...
What does that mean? So a restaurant setting means what?
That the hearing aid will change the way that it functions in that environment.
So we won't hear, or the person wearing it won't hear all the other
as much
noises
background noise. Correct.
And at home, a home setting would mean what?
Just more of a normal environment. You hear everything.
And what might another setting be?
We've had them for music settings. I have patients that love to go to the orchestra.
And so a music setting would mean what?
Would be a very different frequency response, because we don't want to limit the high frequencies, so you want to be able to hear the violins and the flutes.
Huh.
So it is very technical.
That is. Now, that is something I assume that's changed over the last few decades. That,
oh, yes.
I mean, hearing aids didn't always have the different options.
No. And they weren't digital, and you weren't able to control them with your phone. Now it's getting more into doing more frequency response. So perhaps on your car or your home stereo, you want more bass or more treble. That's something that you can control with your cell phone now. And there's even a few companies that are doing remote sessions so that you can tap into the manufacturer for adjustments, like telehealth.
Now, when you talk about bass, from your experience, I never thought about that before, and I'm not musically inclined at all, but do you find people that have any kind of, say, a music background, are they any more adept with hearing aids because they understand more about?
They can be much more critical of that frequency response.
It's kind of like if you're a home builder, you never want to build a home for an engineer.
Yes.
So they can be more critical.
Very much so.
Because they hear more, they're more attuned. Isn't that interesting? I didn't think about that till you just said that. Now, I mentioned earlier that subway sounds over time can hurt, but have individual earphones, like, buds, Beats, whatever people are using, can that hurt your hearing?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. If you're wearing it at that maximum volume for an extended period of time, yes, that would fall into that noise-induced hearing loss.
Wow, noise-induced hearing loss. So how many categories are there of hearing loss?
I don't know.
Many, but noise-induced would be one, age would probably be another.
Sure.
Congenital
hearing loss.
Interesting. Well, in the remaining minutes that we have, I'm going to ask you for 1 or 2 word answers so I can get some questions that may or may not be about your profession. You've spent most of your life in Northeast Ohio in some way. What's the best part about the North Coast to you?
The ability to just go and do anything. We have fabulous museums. Last night I was a Blossom enjoying a concert, opera. Yeah, just there's so much to do here that I absolutely love it.
Love it. Make sure you hear love it. Love Northeast Ohio. Best thing about your profession?
The technical aspects and the learning and the helping people, the one-on-one helping people. Being able to assist someone and their family and seeing that person have a smile on their face, when they walk out the door. That's why I do what I do.
Now, what is something that you would listen to driving to work each day, and how would you listen to it, and how loudly?
Okay, that's probably not that's probably not what I'm supposed to be doing, depending upon the kind of day I'm having. I will usually listen to some type of a jazz music.
And on radio or on some kind of other device?
Whatever I have that happens to be handy at the moment.
How loud might it be?
Probably louder than I'm supposed to have it. I admit.
And the shoemaker's kids, right?
Yes.
One thing that you wish your younger self knew?
No limitations.
No N-O or know your limitations?
Either way. But no limitations. Okay. Just go for it and do it.
Go for it and do it. It's invisible. My guest today works with something that's invisible. People don't see hearing loss. They don't see hearing loss in themselves. We don't see it in others. Because it's invisible, it may come across at times as aloof or even confused. Just because it is invisible doesn't mean that it's not important or that it can't be helped, because it can with our guests like our guest today. Imagine that one of your healthcare providers who sees themselves as much as a teacher as a healthcare provider. Kristina Rynes, Ph.D. in Audiology, is one of those kind of caregivers, helping us today and you as her patient every day to understand the options that are now available for you and your home and wherever you go. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." Well, we now know better about hearing than we did at the start of the show. Now you can go out and you can do better. Thank you to Dr. Kristina Rynes for joining us on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar. I do have one last question before we wrap up that I've been dying to ask you. In a sentence, what was it like to go to Kleinfeld's for a wedding dress for your daughter?
Oh my gosh, it was fabulous.
Best part, did you see Randy?
No, I did not see Randy, but I did see Panina Tournay.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for joining us on our Global Outlook with a Local View. I'm Leslie Ungar.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Acronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.